you can't get away with today, or at least you have great difficulty in getting away with, is psychiatric heresy. We are taught what experiences are permissible in the same way as we are taught what gestures, what manners, what behavior is permissible and socially acceptable. And therefore, if a person has so-called strange experiences and endeavors to communicate these experiences, because naturally one talks about what one feels, and endeavors to communicate these experiences to other people, he is looked at in a very odd way and asked, are you feeling all right? Because people feel distinctly uncomfortable when they realize that they're in the presence of someone who's experiencing the world in a rather different way from themselves. They call in question as to whether this person is indeed human. Not that there may be a high incidence of mental sickness, but that there may be a high incidence of intolerance of variations of consciousness. The minute, in other words, somebody makes an unusual communication to you about an unusual state of consciousness, and you back off, the individual wonders, is there something wrong with me? I don't seem to be understood by anyone. Or he may wonder, oh, what's going on? Has everybody else suddenly gone crazy? Because I could talk to any individual, if I were malicious, and interpret every sane remark you make as something deeply sinister. That would simply exhibit my own paranoia. And a psychiatrist can very easily get paranoid, because the system that he is asked to represent officially is paranoid. I talked with a psychiatrist in England just a few weeks ago. One of the most charming women I've come across, an older woman, very intelligent, quite beautiful, very reasonable. Then we got onto the subject of the experience of what is officially called depersonalization, where you feel that you and your experience, your sensuous experience, that is to say, all that you do experience, the people, the things, the animals, buildings around you, that it's all one. After all, I said, it fits the facts of science, of biophysics, of ecology, biology, much better than our ordinary normal experience fits it. She said, that's not my problem. She said, that may be true, but I am employed by a society which feels that it ought to maintain a certain average kind of normal experience. And my job is to restore people to what society considers normal consciousness. Sanity is simply the vote of organisms that recognize themselves to be human, and they get together and say, well, the way we see it is the way it is. And you will remember in Kipling's story in the Jungle Book called Cars Hunting, how the monkeys, the bandalog, are laughed at because every so often they get together in a meeting and shout, we all say so, so it must be true. Now, so what I want to do for certainly this first part of the seminar is to call in question, very fundamentally, all our basic ideas about what is sickness and what is health, what is sanity and what is insanity. Because I think we have to begin from the position of humility, that we really don't know. And the point from which we have to begin, then, is that we don't know who is healthy and who is sick, who is right and who is wrong. And furthermore, we have to start, I think, from the assumption that because we don't know, there isn't anything we can do about it. That even supposing you could improve society, and that you could improve yourself, you were never sure whether the direction in which you moved it would be an improvement. There's a Chinese story, a kind of a Taoistic story, about a farmer. And one day, his horse ran away. And all the neighbors gathered in the evening and said, "That's too bad." He said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought with it 7 wild horses. "Well," they said, "aren't you lucky?" He said, "Maybe." The next day, his son grappled with one of these wild horses and tried to break it in, and he got thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors said, "Oh, that's too bad that your son broke his leg." He said, "Maybe." The next day, the conscription officers came around, gathering young men for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And the visitors all came around and said, "Isn't that great? Your son got out." He said, "Maybe." You see, you never really know in which direction progress lies. Is it really possible, perhaps, to breed the kind of human beings that we ought to have? And they say, "Hooray!" But they think one moment and think, But what kind of human beings? So you see, there's a total fallacy in the idea of preaching to people. This is why I abandoned the ministry, as I've often said, not because the church didn't practice what it preached, but because it preached. Because you cannot tell people what sort of pattern of life they ought to have. Because if they followed your advice, you might have a breed of monsters. And how do we know whether a certain modification in the structure of the whole sensory perceptive system is a sickness, or whether it is the growing edge, some kind of new improvement of the human being? Well, we have certain very, very rough standards which we apply to this. But we can never be quite sure, because what we call sanity is mob rule. And if some few nuts want to come in and do something different, so what? I see, that's the attitude that we have to have in regard to everything deviant, psychotic, and weird. Because we are not sure what's right, who's sane, which end is up. Well, I mean by the fundamental image that in a relativistic universe, you don't cling to anything, you learn to swim. And you know what swimming is. It's kind of a relaxed attitude to the water, in which you don't keep yourself afloat by holding the water, but by a certain giving to it. And it's just the same in relationships with people all round.
The difficulty with some people that we would call truly insane is that they cannot live simultaneously in the world of their vision and the world of our social vision. Therefore, because they can't play back and forth between one and the other, we say, "Look, you're not behaving properly in accordance with the rules of our game." So there's a certain art, a certain, I would say, basic self-protection that a mystic or a glorious crazy man has to learn. He has to learn to keep his cool.